Hello everybody and welcome back to Music Ed Now. In today's video I'll be doing a full walkthrough of a Leaving Cert melody question. The question in focus is question 1 from the 2024 composing paper. It's in D major, it's in 3/4 time and there's no anacrusis. So without further delay we're going to hop in and look at the template that will be driving all of our decisions going forward. So this melody template is just one of many approaches. It is best practice to go with what you've been preparing with your own teacher, but you might still pick up a few tips even if this melody template isn't exactly what you've been used to. So as in all question 1s, we start with a given phrase, and that's bars 1 to 4. Then I'm proposing that we do an A1 phrase, and this is where we will modulate to the dominant key, if given a major key. The B phrase is going to be bars 9 to 12, and I have a sequence idea that I'm going to show you how to do. And then in bars 13 to 16, the final 4 bars of the piece, we have an A2 phrase. And then down the bottom of the page here, I've got 6 key steps. And these are going to act as the chapters to this video. So step 1 here is write a chord bank for the given key and a chord bank for the dominant key. Our given key for the 2024 question 1 melody is D major. So that's going to give us this chord bank. We've got the chords D, E minor, F sharp minor, G, A, B minor and C sharp diminished. And then we're also going to need, for our modulating phrase, we're going to need the A major chord bank. So even before you start putting any melodies down, you can get a bit of this rough work out of the way, write down the 2 chord banks that you'll need. You'll notice that the word dominant in music means 5. So if we begin in D major, all we have to do is count up to the 5th note of that key, which is A in this case, and that is the new chord bank we need for our modulating phrase. So that gives us the chord bank of A major. Here is going to be our dominant key. Next thing we're going to do is just look at the given phrase. So in step 2, we're going to analyze this given phrase. We might harmonize it or note any interesting melodic or rhythmic material. And I've already told you there won't be any anacrusis in this video. First things first, let's have a listen to the melody. So a helpful thing to do when analyzing is maybe just have a look at the chord progression used here. And to open with, this definitely is the chord of 1. We've got a chord note. This is an accented neighbour note, but then we've got a chord note and chord note. A quite unusual phrase actually to open the melody because we got this leap to a non-chord note, which is called an appoggiatura. Then in this bar we're looking at the chord of 5. We've got E, C sharp, passing note B and A. This is back to D, F sharp and A. Clearly outlines a D major chord. And here we're ending the phrase on an A chord, and straight away you might be looking at this and saying, but doesn't that have a B note? And there's no B note in the chord of A. Well, what's happening here is we've got a suspension, or actually just an accented neighbour note is the other way of looking at it. So what we're saying is that this B is not as important as these 2 A's here. And this makes perfect sense if we think of this as a cadence point. Bars 3 to 4 will regularly be a cadence point, and we have an imperfect cadence here ending on chord 5. So that's the analysis of the chords. Let's look at any interesting rhythmic material or any interesting melodic material. So straight away my eye is drawn towards this bar. We've got a downward leap of a 6th, F sharp to A. And then we do have this funny suspension idea, or this accented neighbour note idea, depending on what way you look at it. So we might start to use that later on in our melody. Then the only other thing to note is this accented non-chord note. So C sharp is happening on a beat. It doesn't belong to D, but it then returns here. So we call this a neighbour note because it goes next door and returns. So again, that might be an idea we use later on. And then bar 2, nothing really special. We just have a descending pattern outlining a chord with a little step passing note. And the analysis at this point doesn't need to be anything too in-depth, just noticing any little rhythmic or melodic features that we might come to use later on. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back to my melody template, and I'm just going to show you what I've done in terms of giving my students a bar by bar approach, what to do in every bar. So when we start with bar 5 here, what I'm looking to do is get my students to write a bar of music that is based on chord 1 of the key. In this case, it's going to be D major. And then when I say development of bar 1, what I mean is we're going to look at what bar 1 looks like and then just write something that's similar to that. It might be a similar rhythm, it might be a similar melodic pattern, but it's going to have some sort of cohesion or glue with the given phrase. And that's what's going to make this an A phrase in keeping with the given. So let's do that now. So we have our bar selected. I'm going to start with the D note again, crotchet D note. I think I'm going to actually use the same rhythm here, and I'm going to write this. So what I have here is an accented passing note. So we had an accented neighbor note in the given phrase, and I'm just extending the range a little bit. Instead of going down, I'm going up, and you'll see here I've landed on my chord note F sharp here, thinking of the chord of D here again, and then I leap up because this section did a leap as well, and this time I'm leaping up to another chord note, and then I have a passing note here, F sharp or G. So passing from the chord note A to G, and then in my next bar I'm going to land on F sharp because that's where the ear wants to be pulled. But if I go back to my template really quickly, in bar 6 I want to go to the chord of 6. Now I have a very important reason why I get my students to use chord 6 in bar 6, but I'll come back to the theory of that in a second. For now, let's just go back and write in what it would mean to be chord 6 in this key, which is going to be B minor, because chord 6 in our key is B minor. I'll throw up the chord bank there for you. I'll move it out of the way a little bit here. So if you look there at chord 6 in the key, it's B minor. So I'm going to use B minor as the basis for what I do in this bar. So I'll even stick B minor in there above the thing just to keep everybody on track. And then I'm going to put an F sharp note in because that's the 5th of the key. It lands beautifully from that G that we had before, stepwise. I'm going to use the same rhythm and melodic contour, the shape that we had in bar 2. So you'll see here I've got a chord note F sharp, chord note D, then we have a step down passing note from C sharp to B. So I've based this correctly on chord of 6 in the key, and you'll also see that if I match this with this, they're very similar. This is why it's a development of this bar, and it's also why it is in keeping with the given phrase. So far we have this. And now in bars 7 and 8, it's really important that we modulate to the dominant key. So you'll see here I've bracketed off bar 7 and 8 in the template just so that you can visually see that something different is happening here. So we still keep bar 7 as a development of bar 3, so you'll see that the bars of the phrase is kind of tracked down through the piece together. And bar 8 is going to be some sort of development of bar 4. But the big difference here is the 5-to-1 cadence, perfect cadence here. I'm actually talking about 5 in the new key, which is A major, the dominant key, to 1 in the new key, which is A major. So you've got an E chord going to an A chord. That is 5-to-1 in our new key. This will also mean that in bar 7, we will need an accidental because there is going to be a difference between our given key and the dominant key. So we're going to look at that in detail now in a second. So for this, I'll also need my A major key bank. I'll move it over here. So we've got our original key, our given key on the left, which is D major, and our dominant key on the right, which is A major. So you'll see that what we're going to require here is the chord of E major in this bar. And I'll put an E chord above there just so you can see what I'm doing. And to A major. That's the chord sequence we're going to try and do. So I could do something like this. So this is very similar to what we had in bar 3, and maybe even a little bit too similar. So I might end up changing this in a second, but if I had this, it would be very close to what I had here, and that might not be a good idea. So it doesn't show much development. So I'll stick that B up an octave instead, and then you can land on A in this bar. At these points, at these cadence points in our melody, it's okay in the 4th bar of each phrase to have a longer note value. So this would be a perfectly reasonable modulation. What might be a little bit fancier is if we develop maybe the rhythm and give it some sort of rhythmic momentum into the modulation. So let's try to do that now. If I do this instead, let's change this to quavers, and let's do maybe a rising scale pattern. keep the B, and then I'll land on A. So you see here it sounds like this now. And the D here is actually making this more of a 5/7. So that gets a little bit fancier. If that's a little bit too much for you, you could just do something like this. The big thing to note here is that we will always need an accidental that is a little sharp indicated on the score in bar 7. And that accidental is always going to be a raising of the 4th degree of our original key. So if we go back to what our original key is, the 4th degree is the note G, and it will always require us sharpening by 1 semitone that note. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that if we go back to our chord bank here, and actually just to not confuse things, I'll get rid of my original key chord bank. If you look at the chord of 5 here in our dominant key, we have the notes E, G sharp and B in that triad. Another way to know what accidental you'll require in bar 7 is it is always the 3rd of that triad, that chord of 5 triad in the new key. So you'll see G sharp is the 3rd of our E major triad, and that's always going to be the sharp that's required. That sharp is always the difference between the two keys, the given key and the dominant key. One last thing I want to show you here is if we were doing something here where we're trying to be in keeping with what the given phrase did, we might actually be able to do something fancy here as well. So just like in bar 4 of the given phrase, we have a B going to A, and the B is not the chord note, but the landing on A is. We might be able to do something similar. We'll go B, A, A. And this is just a little sprinkle of creativity, copying that there's something unusual or unique happening with the melody here in bar 4 and restating the exact same thing up an octave in bar 8. So let's have a listen to our new phrase now. I'll zoom out a bit. And we started with this. So does your ear hear both of those melodies as belonging to a melody or belonging to the same melody? And hopefully the answer in your mind is yes. The next thing we're going to come on to is our B phrase. I get my students to start the B sequence on the 3rd degree of the given key. So again, you're going to need to think back. We're in D major here. What is the 3rd note in the scale of D major? And if you go up, it's D is the 1st degree, E is the 2nd degree, the 3rd degree is F sharp. So straight away, before I even do anything else, I know in bar 9 here, I can start on F sharp. The next thing I want to do is, if I look at the template here, development of a pattern from the given phrase. So I'm going to look at the given phrase now in a second, and I'm going to decide, is there anything interesting melodically that I can take from the given phrase and apply it to my bar 9 and 10. So if I look up here at the given phrase, this is the first 4 bars. Oops. This is what I'm looking at to try and figure out if is there anything interesting I can take from here. And what I'm noticing is there's a dotted rhythm idea here, a descending dotted rhythm idea, and that might be something interesting. So I might even start with that down here, my B phrase. So we have F sharp. I'll turn this into a dotted rhythm F sharp. I might even, I'll leap down the 6th because that's in keeping with the chord I need. And I forgot to say that actually. The chords are very specific in this B phrase as well. I'm going to do chord 1 to chord 4 in these first 2 bars. So let's focus on them first. Chord 1 in bar 9, chord 4 in bar 10. I'll do like this. So this is F sharp, going to A, D, and then I have a neighbor note or a passing note yet to be decided. Well, actually, it will be a neighbor note because I know the next chord is going to be chord 4 in the key. Also notice that once we modulate here in bar 7 and 8, we forget about that dominant key altogether. Now we're back in our given key of D major. I'll just move this up out of the way. So we're back here in our given key, and D major has these notes, D, F sharp, and A. So I've got an F sharp kicking us off, 3rd degree of the scale, A, D, and then I'm going to go to probably a D note here because So I have the chord of G here. I'm going to go D, stepwise note C sharp to B, and I'm stealing that kind of from this part of bar 2 in the given phrase. And then actually I can do something here that maybe gives me a bit of a, so if I'm going to do quavers here, I'm going to do an octave leap, BA. So this is my 2-bar idea from chord 1 to chord 4 in the given key. And here's something interesting about the maths of this phrase. If I start on the 3rd degree of the scale and I map this melody very closely to the chord of D major, D, F sharp and A, and this one very closely to G major, G, B and D in this case, what I can do is take both of those, press Ctrl and C to copy, and then paste it in. Now obviously you have to do a manual paste on the day of your exam. I just have MuseScore here, so it's quite easy for me. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put everything up 1 step in the scale. What a sequence is when we have one pattern and then we repeat the pattern both rhythmically and melodically. So I'm going down a step, but we shift it up a position. So you'll do a manual copy and paste on the day of your exam and then shift everything up 1 step. So an F sharp becomes a G, an A becomes a B, and so on. And just without even thinking about chords, this becomes E minor to A, which is a very strong sequence pattern. Chord 1 to chord 4 to chord 2 to chord 5. And just to lead back in, I probably wouldn't keep the quavers here. I'll change that maybe to a crotchet, and I might even change it just to A, just to keep it simple. And then we're on to the very last phrase. So just a quick recap of the sequence. Chords 1 to 4 in bars 9 and 10. It must begin on the 3rd degree of the given key. And whatever pattern we have in here, we do a sequence of it up 1 step, and always up 1 step in bars 11 and 12. You might alter bar 12 depending on what way the melody finishes out to suit your needs, which is completely normal in a sequence idea. And this creates a lovely chord progression 1 to 4 to 2 to 5. I really love this idea as a sequence in an exam situation, because with the clock involved and under time pressure, what you get here is 4 bars for the price of 2. Once you come up with a good pattern in bars 9 and 10, you're just literally copying across the ideas and moving it up 1 step in bars 11 and 12. We're going to now move on to the final phrase, which is A2, the A2 phrase. And what we have in this one is chord 1 going to chord 2, going to chord 5, going to chord 1. This is just a stock chord progression that's very common to finish out a piece. A 2 to 5 1 to 1 is like a pillar of harmony in most genres of music. So we're going to develop bar 1 in this first bar of the phrase, develop bar 2 in this second bar of the phrase, develop bar 3, and then bring it home on potentially a high tonic long note value in the 16th bar. So what I'm thinking here is we finished on a high A, so we aren't a million miles away from the very high D. Now this might be, you wouldn't want to stay any higher than that. Maybe 2 ledger lines is quite high enough. So we'll do something like this, and I'll explain what I'm doing then after, or explain how I've come up with that after. All quaver notes here. So this, if you look at bar 1 and then look at this, it's quite a dramatic development. So we're hitting the same D tonic note, and then we're also hitting this G and F sharp part of bar 1 in here. But how we're getting to that G and F sharp is we are doing a full scale rundown, and it just so happens to work out that we get G F sharp here and G F sharp here. So it's in keeping with the first one, and a kind of a fancy elaboration on what we were given. And then I will use the same E note as the start of this bar, but let's change it around. So E, remember this is going to be, I'll show you, just chuck in the chords here. It's going to be D going to chord E minor, which is chord 2 in the key, and then we're going to go A to D for our perfect cadence. So having this in the back of our mind, now if we use these in the exam, we might rub them out, but just this keeps us kind of on the straight and narrow so that we know what chord we're thinking about. And obviously if you have your chord bank handy and your rough work, then this also keeps you on the straight and narrow. So we'll use the same crotchet, quaver, quaver, crotchet pattern that we had in the bar 2 of the given phrase. So we'll use that same rhythm, but we might change it a little bit around. So I'm going to go G, A, B. So this just inverts what we had in here. This was a descending, C sharp, B, A, and this is a rising, G, A, B, and it keeps in our chord of 2. And then, like we did with our modulation phrase, it can be nice to keep quavers as a nice building momentum towards the final bar. So let's start on C sharp here, because that's the third of our chord. Something like this. So we have C sharp, passing note D, E is a chord note. We can think of that G actually as the 7 of A7, and then falling down, we've got E, which is going to land on maybe a long note this time, D. And maybe even keeping that crotchet rest that we had at the end of the given phrase and at the end of our A2 phrase that we had. Some of you might have noticed there's also the opportunity to do this suspension note idea. So we had B, which was a non-chord note on the strong beat, on the downbeat, going a quaver later to our chord note, B, A, A, then we did it up the octave, B, A, A. Well, we can do something very similar here. The last chord is D. So if we steal this idea again and we go E this time, so E is a non-chord note, it's happening on the strong beat, but a quaver later, if we go to D, then this is in keeping what we were given before. So all together we have this nice little idea tracking the whole way through our bar 4s of the phrases. Let's have a listen to that phrase. So that's the full 16 bars. And now we're finally at step 6. So we're going to add suitable phrasing and dynamic marks. Keep it simple, slur marks on stepwise movement, louder dynamics for higher register. So that's just a general rule of thumb. If you go high, it's good to have it loud. If you are low down, maybe that's where you put in your pianos or mezzo pianos. But you don't want a million dynamics dotted throughout the whole thing. This is 16 bars of music. A dynamic mark maybe at the start of every phrase, but keep it simple. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to scroll down here and you're going to have the sample answer that we came up with. So we have our given phrase there. You can see it's annotated there. I put in the F, and anytime I saw stepwise movement, C sharp to D, I put a little slur mark. That means that whoever's playing this, in this case I chose a clarinet, is going to play those notes smoothly with one breath. Then we have G, F sharp again. I had the slur mark on that because of stepwise movement. C sharp to A is all stepwise movement. So I'm just literally looking for those stepwise movements and putting a slur mark in. Here I have a D crescendo, a hairpin. And then I put in MF at the start here. Again, you'll look out for the slur marks for stepwise movement. We grow here because it's starting to get a little bit higher. And it's quaver movement here, so I just did a little bit of a hairpin crescendo up to forte. Then I start the sequence quietly, so F sharp, mezzo piano, or moderately quietly I should say, and then again we grow towards the end of the phrase. Then we start the A2 phrase forte, and then this big scale pattern, D sharp, all the way down to F sharp here, all scale movement, so that all gets slurred with that slur mark. More slurring towards the end of the phrase here as well. And then the last thing I have are these little commas are phrase marks, and you do need these. There's two ways of doing a phrase mark, I should say. You can do a full arch the whole way across that first phrase, or I find the very simple way is just putting in a little comma, and that denotes that it's the end of that phrase. So you just you'll see a little comma there at the end of every fourth bar in the phrase, and then we don't need one at the very end because we have our double bar line. And that is the whole process from start to finish of doing a melody. I really hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please consider hitting subscribe. We're a very new and growing channel, so every bit of help is very much appreciated. This has been David Kennedy with Music Out Now, and I'll see you in the next video.